Oops, sorry. Just testing the computer. All right, Patty, just let me know when you're ready for me to start.
Okay. How long is your, and you probably go ahead and just start.
Okay. Do we know if Jennifer is on? All right. Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the WTS-NC Triangle Chapter, the Southeastern States, and the Federal Railroad Administration. I'm Jenny Fleming, Chair of the Southeast Rail Forum Steering Committee and member of the WTS-NC Triangle Chapter. I want to give you a big thanks for joining us virtually today for our very first Rail Segment event. This is a prelude to what's coming up next spring at our Southeast Rail Forum, which we all hope will be held in person in Raleigh. The rail segment, this one includes highlights of the Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative to expand rail reliability and service, creating a pathway to separate passenger and freight operations along the Richmond to Washington, D.C. corridor. To start with, I want to give a big thanks to our top-tier sponsors for the Rail Forum. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to host events like this. Our gold sponsor is, there's a big, all the states you can see there and WTS. So our gold sponsors are VHB and WSP. Our silver sponsor, Moffitt Nickel. Our bronze sponsors, we have Three Oaks Engineering, HDR, Mott McDonald, Simpson Engineers and Associates, AECOM, Dewberry, the North Carolina Ports Authority, and the National Railway Safety Services. I'm going to stop sharing now because we're going to move into our next piece of this event where we're going to have some breakout rooms. So everyone was automatically muted when you joined the call. So if you have any questions, please either type it in the chat or you can raise your hand and someone will call on you, probably me. So if you want to share your video, we welcome that as well. So for all of you who are sharing your video, thank you. It's great to see all the faces we've been missing over these last 6 months. So we are recording today's session, and it will be available through the WTS website and the Southeast Rail Forum website after this event. So if anyone who missed something can come back to it. We're going to start our event with a short networking session and sort of networking icebreaker activity. And these are being brought to you by our reception and break sponsors. And those include Gannett Fleming, STV, Pinecone Transportation Professionals, the Fayetteville Cumberland County Economic Development Corporation, and of course our virtual event Wi-Fi sponsor, Kinley Horn. So we have pre-assigned everyone to a breakout group, and a moderator will be being provided by our sponsors, and they will walk you through the activity. You will be automatically sent into a group. I think a little box will pop up on your screen. You just hit to join, and when it's all done, it'll automatically bring you back to the larger group meeting. Just think of this as your lunch table. If this was a lunch event, we want to start out with everyone giving an introduction, your name, company, kind of your role and what you do. And then we have a couple of icebreakers, questions for everyone to discuss, and your moderator will walk you through these. But think about, how has or does rail impact your daily life? And if you had a crystal ball, what would rail look like in the future to you? So those are two questions we want to kind of spend the next 20 minutes or so talking about. And then we'll bring everyone back to the main lobby at 12:25, and then we'll go into our presentation with Ms. Jennifer Mitchell. So Patty, I think we're ready to go into our groups now.
Might take us just a couple minutes, but we'll get there in a second.
Good afternoon. Are we in the breakout room now?
Not yet.
Not yet.
I thought it was, sorry.
It's okay, Eddie, we're getting there. We solved a lot of our rail concerns for the near and far future. But with that, I want to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker for today, Ms. Jennifer Mitchell. She's the director of the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation, also known as DRPT. Jennifer was reappointed in January of 2018 by Governor Ralph Northam as a director of DRPT. It's the state agency responsible for providing funding and oversight to public transit systems and passenger and freight rail programs across the Commonwealth. Prior to that, she was previously appointed to this position in 2014 by Governor Terry McAuliffe. In her time at DRPT, Jennifer's led several high-priority transportation initiatives for the Commonwealth, including a recently announced $3.7 billion deal with CSX to construct the Long Bridge and dramatically expand passenger rail in the Commonwealth. She was instrumental in legislation that provided a dedicated funding and governance reforms for the Washington Metropolitan Area Transportation Authority, also known as WMATA, which is easier to say. New sources of transit funding from high occupancy tolling projects in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. Some of her another initiative is the creation of the Metro Safety Commission, developing more rigorous and transparent allocation processes for statewide transit funding, extending passenger rail to Roanoke, and opening the quote, Pulse bus rapid transit system in Richmond, Virginia. She also serves as a member of the Commonwealth Transportation Board and as a board member on several transit agencies across the Commonwealth. Jennifer has over 25 years of experience in the transportation industry, where she specialized in planning and implementation of public transit projects, with particular emphasis on developing strategic financial plans and advancing major projects through planning, design, and construction. In 2018, she was named by Railway Age as a Woman of the Year and received the 2017 Distinguished Public Service Leadership Award from the Virginia Transit Association. She also has received Woman of the Year by the WTS chapters in Washington, D.C. and Central Virginia in 2016. She's previously served on the executive committee for APTA and is on the Women's Transportation Seminar Foundation Board of Directors. Jennifer has a master's in regional planning from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and a bachelor in urban planning from the University of Virginia. So please help me in welcoming Ms. Jennifer Mitchell.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It's great to see so many faces. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen here. Hold on for 1 second. Let's see. Okay. Hopefully you all can see that. Let me just get this in presentation mode. All right. Well, good afternoon. It's great to see everybody again. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening in Virginia with rail and our Transforming Rail in Virginia program. I also want to talk a little bit about our new Passenger Rail Authority, the projects that are part of our Transforming Rail in Virginia program, and a little bit about stakeholder responsibilities as well. So first, back in December, we announced that the Commonwealth had reached a deal with CSX. It's a $3.7 billion deal in total, in which we'll be acquiring 350 miles of right-of-way and 225 miles of track. We're going to fund the majority of this with state and local revenues. Amtrak has also committed $944 million towards this program as well. So as far as the projects go, and I realize that map is probably hard for you all to read there, but we will be building out infrastructure in several phases. And the phases we've committed to with funding right now are phases 1 and 2. And that will include a number of the projects we'll talk about in just a few minutes. And our long-term goal is trying to achieve full separation of passenger and commuter and freight service, especially between our VRE service territory, which is Spotsylvania, Virginia North up to Washington, D.C. So where there is a third track, we'll be acquiring third track and right of way to build a fourth track in the future between Richmond and D.C. And then also acquiring a line, east-west line called the Buckingham Branch, which is a short line. It's owned by CSX, but is currently operated by Buckingham Branch, which is a short line. And the S line between Petersburg and Ridgeway, North Carolina. There is also a phases 3 and 4, which would include total build out of a dedicated third track between Spotsylvania and DC. We don't have funding for that at this time, but we expect that once this program of projects is completed, we expect that the Commonwealth can continue to move forward on those projects as well. So with the service that we'll be acquiring as part of this, we'll be acquiring new service with each phase as we build it out. We'll eventually, by the completion of this program, be able to double state-supported Amtrak service between Richmond and DC, which will result in nearly hourly service between the two cities. We'll have an additional train to Norfolk with a midday departure. We will also have a new round trip to Newport News, and we'll be increasing VRE service by 75%. So this is our service plan. Again, maybe hard for you all to read on the screen there, but we would be adding another 6 additional round trips between originating in Virginia and connecting up to the Northeast corridor. With each phase, we will be acquiring new service. So upon execution of our arrangement with CSX, and we expect to go to financial close by the end of this year, upon execution of that, we would have a slot for one new Amtrak train, and that would be the one to Norfolk. And then with the completion of phase 1 infrastructure, we would have 2 new round trips as well, including one originating in Richmond and one originating in Newport News. And then with the completion of phase 3, we would have another 3 trains originating from Richmond. And this is the new VRE service plan as well. We would be adding 5 new VRE round trips. Upon completion of the deal, we would have a slot for 1 new VRE round trip, 2 after phase 1 improvements are completed, and 2 after phase 2 is completed. And these, some of the new trains will also include later evening service and weekend service as well. So we are currently in the process of negotiating our final definitive agreements with CSX. Right now, we expect to have those completed by October. We did have exciting news earlier this month or last week in that FRA has now signed the record of decision for the Long Bridge project. So that was a huge milestone that we had been working on with the District Department of Transportation, VRE, Amtrak, and FRA, and CSX, of course. So very excited about that milestone. That now allows us to move forward with preliminary engineering for Long Bridge as well. We expect that we'll be making payments to CSX by the end of this calendar year. And we're currently also finalizing our agreement with Amtrak and VRE for their funding as well. So in terms of the implementation of this program, in this General Assembly session this year, they created a new Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. And as we were working through governance options on the Long Bridge with the DC Department of Transportation, we started looking at different potential governance models. And what we eventually ended up coming back to is to establish a new authority within the Commonwealth that would have some additional powers than a state agency would have in terms of procurement and personnel policies. And then also has a little bit more of a independent board as well. In Virginia, we have one-term governors, and so there was a desire to have a board that has a little bit more political resiliency and longer-term thinking. And that board, it's a 15-member board. It includes 12 appointees from the governor, a ex officio appointee from VRE and Amtrak, and then the chair of DRP is the director of DRPT. So the Passenger Rail Authority will have the ability to enter into agreements for design and construction for all of the passenger rail projects in our Transforming Rail in Virginia program, along with other rail passenger projects as well. They'll have the ability to be a direct recipient for grants. They'll have eminent domain authority if needed. However, they will not be operating service directly. They would continue to partner with Amtrak and VRE for the actual operations of passenger and commuter service. Most importantly, though, this new rail authority will actually own the rail assets that are being acquired from CSX in terms of land and station areas as well. So in the General Assembly session, we also had a new transportation omnibus bill in which they created a new streamlined format for transportation funding in Virginia. And with that was created a new Commonwealth Rail Fund. So as before, we had a couple programs called our Rail Enhancement Fund and our Intercity Passenger Rail Operating and Capital Fund. Those have essentially gone away. And now there's a single Commonwealth Rail Fund, which receives a percentage of our overall transportation trust fund. That is further divided so that 93% of that Commonwealth Rail Fund is now going to be going to the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, and 7% would be retained by DRPT, who will continue to do statewide freight planning, or freight programs and statewide rail planning as well. The important thing is that the state will still be responsible for developing our statewide rail plan, and that would be approved by our Commonwealth Transportation Board. The Rail Authority must only implement projects that are part of that Commonwealth statewide rail plan as well. So I apologize, it looks like my graphics didn't come through here, but this was just division of responsibilities between DRPT and the Passenger Rail Authority. So as far as the timeline for mobilizing the new rail authority goes, over the summer, we've been working with some consultants who've been assisting us with organizational design, putting together an early operations plan, documenting our policies and procedures, particularly in this temporary period when we're still mobilizing the authority, and then also engaging in an executive search firm. We will be hiring an executive director once we have a board. So we have that process in place and ready to go. We expect that the board appointments are going to be announced very soon, hopefully within the next 2 weeks. And with that, we would have our first board meeting likely in October, where we'd start to get put in place the bylaws, policies that we need to get mobilized, and elect our board officers. As I mentioned before, we expect that in November or by the end of the year, we'll make our first payments to CSX, and then eventually our agreements will be transferred over from DRPT over to the Rail Authority. And then over the course of the next few months in the winter and the spring, we expect to hire the executive director and additional staff for the authority. So a little bit more about some of the projects that are part of the Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative. I'm going to start going from north south. So with that is the Long Bridge project, estimated to be $1.9 billion. We, as I mentioned before, just got the record of decision for that. We expect to start preliminary engineering this fall. That project itself, as you know, is actually a 1.5 mile corridor. It includes several bridge structures across the Potomac, in addition to the long span that's between Roslyn and Haynes Point on the other side. We'll be building a fourth track, which will become the approach to the Long Bridge. That's actually part of our Atlantic Gateway program that we applied for and received a federal fast lane grant a couple of years ago. We expect to begin some very early construction items for that later this spring. Let's see. And then, let's see, moving south, we'll also be building a third track project from Franconia to Lorton, and also a project called the Franconia Springfield Bypass. So what we've acquired from CSX is essentially between Richmond north to Franconia is the right-of-way that's on the east side of their existing corridor. At Franconia, we'll be building a bypass, which will essentially be a flyover that will get all of our passenger trains from the east side of the corridor over to the west. And at that point, the trains would then line up on the west side of the tracks for Franconia, Alexandria, Crystal City, and then going into the new Long Bridge, which will be built just upstream of the existing two-track bridge. In addition to that, we'll be building out 6 different sidings as part of phases 1 and 2. These are approximately 2-mile sidings, and that would be a third track at several locations, most of which are between DC and Spotsylvania, but also a couple that'll be south of that as well. So a little bit about the funding now. The total program, as I've said before, is $3.7 billion. Amtrak has committed $944 million as part of that, which is roughly about 25% of the whole program. We've also identified a number of other state and local funding sources that we plan to use. One of the biggest sources of those is state priority transportation funds, and these are statewide transportation funds that can be used for various modes, including highways, airports, or rail. And so we'll be using those for this project as well. VRE has also committed about $210 million in dedicated commuter rail funds that they have called the Commuter Rail Operating and Capital Fund. We also intend to use I-66 inside the Beltway toll revenues, and that's a managed lane project that the state operates, VDOT does. And because the Long Bridge and VRE's Manassas line parallels I-66 and directly takes riders or drivers off of 66, we are planning to utilize those funds to help expand the bridge, since we can't expand VRE's Manassas line until we do that. We expect that we'll probably leverage those revenues with a federal loan, either TIFIA or RIF. We've been in some discussions with DOT about that preliminarily as well. In addition to that, we've received some funding from the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority for about $23 million for these, the Franconia bypass that I mentioned before. We have some other miscellaneous state funds that we are planning to include in the program. With that said, though, we intend to continue to apply for other sources of federal funding in the future, and that may include FTA revenues, as well as FRA or US DOT grants as those funding opportunities become available. So just in final, once the Passenger Rail Authority is up in place, this will be a very complex partnership with all of our partners. DRPT will continue to lead this program of projects forward until such time that the Passenger Rail Authority is actually mobilized and is in a position to take over the lead for those projects. The Passenger Rail Authority will be the future owner and developer of all of the new passenger rail assets, including leading design and construction. And VRE will continue to operate the existing commuter rail system. CSX will continue to be our freight operator in the corridor, and will continue to work with Amtrak as the operator for our state-supported intercity passenger rail. So with that, I know I've gone through a lot of information quickly, but I am happy to take questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. If you would, to help us as moderators with this, if you have questions, please type them in the chat and I will read them out. That way we can try to get to as many as we can. So let's go for it. I bet you there's people typing right now, Jennifer.
Okay.
Here we go. When does DRPT plan to announce the short list or preferred vendor for Long Bridge preliminary engineering?
We are working on that procurement right now. I actually don't have a date when we expect to announce that at this point in time. But I know that the procurement is underway as we speak. I can try to get some information about that, but I don't know that offhand.
So this, will the program include any new passenger station or station expansions? And how about maintenance facilities?
As far as the existing stations go, this program of projects that we have right now doesn't plan to expand or add any new stations at this point. I will say that we are currently doing some planning work to look at improvements at the Staples Mill station and potentially expanding that in the future, as well as some upgrades to the Ettrick station near Petersburg. Those are part of a separate, those are not part of the Transforming Rail and Initiative program right now. I will say that we are continuing to look at the possibility of expanding passenger rail into the New River Valley. That is something that we've said we would like to do in the long term on our Roanoke line, but again, not currently part of this program of projects.
Okay. So can you clarify the funding split? The slide that showed the authority was 7% and DRPT is 93%. But the question comes from Greg Munden, and he believes that it was discussed the other way around.
No, I apologize if this graphic is, it didn't come through very well in this presentation, but the Passenger Rail Authority will receive 93% of the new Commonwealth Rail Fund. DRPT will have 7% of that. And again, that's because the majority of our passenger rail program, or all of our passenger rail program really, will be going over to the Rail Authority. DRPT will continue to implement freight programs. That includes our short line rail preservation program, our rail industrial access program, and will continue to have statewide rail planning responsibilities.
Okay, thank you. The next question is Virginia in discussions with North Carolina about further extensions and service to the south?
We've been, we have always been coordinating with our friends at NCDOT on this as well, particularly as it relates to the S line. And I know they've got some plans underway in North Carolina as well. So yeah, we do continue to coordinate with NCDOT. Not on any, I don't have any specific, I guess, new service to add that's part of this rail initiative at this point, but we are coordinating with them, particularly on the S line.
And our next rail segment will talk some about that S line project. So,
and I think Jason might be on the, I think I saw his name earlier, and he may be on the phone as well.
Yeah, I believe he may be. So while we wait for any other questions to come in, I want to ask, and this was part of our breakout earlier, if you had a crystal ball, where would you see rail in the next 5 to 10 years, especially in light of how things have gone in 2020 with the COVID and everything else we've had going on?
I do think personally that we will see rail service, intercity rail service bouncing back. I think we may even see rail starting to take a bigger market share from airlines, particularly for smaller trips or shorter trips. And we may see some of that translate into Northeast Corridor trips as well. I think that with COVID, people are generally starting to come back. We're starting to see people coming back to work. In Virginia, we've actually seen our traffic levels, particularly in Northern Virginia, are really starting to come back, and we're starting to see a lot more people on the roads right now. A little bit of a different pattern in the peak period, But we also know long-term, especially with commuter rail, that we need to have alternatives to driving alone. Even if, people were hesitant to come back to using public transit right away, we know that there's not enough room in our cities for parking all of those cars and for handling that level of traffic. So I feel very strongly that we'll continue to see longer term commuter rail be a very big part of our transportation program, and that we will see people coming back to intercity rail as well.
The next question is, were there any specific service outcomes that Amtrak requested in return for their investment?
We are still working through our Amtrak agreement with them right now, as well as our operating agreement with CSX. As part of that, we don't necessarily have what I would say are service standards, our service outcomes as a result of this. With the exception of some processes that we would be putting in place to improve performance and have more reliable service longer term.
Okay. The next question is, would Virginia ever consider other operators for state passenger rail? For example, Keolis, Deutsche Bahn, in lieu of Amtrak?
We at this point in time, we expect that our state-supported service is always going to continue to be operated by Amtrak. I think we wouldn't want to rule anything out in the future, just knowing that how things change and how things, when you look back 20, 30 years ago, we know how different they are today. But right now, our plans really would be to continue to operate with Amtrak. I mentioned the Buckingham branch. That's an east-west rail line that we're acquiring in order to be able to preserve that for future passenger service, should it be feasible, should the demand warrant. We also wanted to protect it for continued expansion of short line freight service as well. But that may be an opportunity where there may be an opportunity to use a different operator for service on that line. But I would say that's very, very long term. We don't have the funding at this point to upgrade the Buckingham branch to be suitable for passenger operations at this point in time.
Okay. Speaking of funding, the next question is the $3.7 billion currently funded with, so let me read this, it's a little confusing. Is the $3.7 billion currently funded with the list of sources identified? If you received a USDOT or FRA grant, do those funds roll back to VPRA for further investments?
Yes, and we do have funds identified for the whole $3.7 billion program, and as well as looking at financing, debt financing opportunities as well. Our plan would be, though, if we, as I mentioned before, we're going to continue to seek other federal dollars. We still believe that this program of projects, particularly the expansion of Long Bridge, has a national impact and really impacts the entire East Coast for this expansion. And so we do believe that we would like to see more federal funds in the program. And so if we are able to acquire and attract more federal funds to the program, yes, we would expect that all of these resources would go back into, it would stay with the rail authority so that they can be invested elsewhere in the corridor.
Okay. Another one came in. Negotiating passenger rail solutions with the freight railroads has been a challenge for the industry. Can you offer any feedback or lessons learned on what it took to make this negotiation successful?
Sure, and I want to give a lot of credit to CSX on this as well. The leadership team there, led by Jamie Boychuk, really, I think, saw this as a real opportunity, and we're looking at things in a bit of a different way. I think that CSX, like many of the Class 1 railroads, are looking to optimize their assets and their base of assets, and in some cases that may mean getting rid of some assets as well. Obviously, that we've seen sales of rail lines in other states that are going on too. And so I think that what we finally saw was really a win-win situation for both the Commonwealth and CSX, where CSX was able to accomplish some of their financial objectives with an opportunity like this. Also, it's important for them to get some of our passenger trains out of their way for freight service. And so I think once they really understood our vision to be able to long-term be able to get our VRE and Amtrak trains onto dedicated tracks, they also saw that from an operations standpoint, there was a lot of benefits for them as well. And I think most importantly, you know, we were able to really step forward with funds in hand and with a funding commitment. And I think that made a big difference as well. But I do want to give a lot of credit to their leadership team for this as well. They saw this as a real opportunity.
That's great. I like the win-win story.
Mm-hmm.
The next question is, can you provide an update on potential commuter rail service beyond Union Station and how operations into Maryland or MARC service in Virginia could be accomplished in the future?
So with the expansion of Long Bridge, we do expect that we'll have the additional capacity to potentially have what's called a run-through service between MARC, which is the Maryland commuter rail service, potentially being able to serve some stations in Virginia. Likewise, for VRE, potentially to be able to serve some stations in Maryland. There's a lot of things that have to be worked out there from a technical standpoint regarding storage of trains midday, also making sure that it really will be, once we have the capacity that's created by this program of projects and the expansion of Long Bridge, we will have a dedicated, essentially 2-track system between DC and Alexandria. So that really does open up a lot of capacity for us to potentially be able to accommodate some MARC service as well. So that is something that we hope we can accomplish longer term. As I mentioned before, there's still some technical issues with platforms and storage, not to mention labor issues and some other institutional issues there that would have to be worked through. But we do think that there's an opportunity there for that, and which I personally believe would be a real game changer for the DC area to be able to have that service, MARC service, be able to go into Virginia.
Very good. That's all the questions. If anyone else has any, pop them in the chat. While we wait to see if any more come in, a really big thank you, Jennifer, for joining us, for being our kind of guinea pig, if you will, with our first ever rail segments, our virtual platform here. I think it went really well. Great information. And hopefully you'll join us again in the spring when, cross our fingers, we're back together in person for a couple of days.
Yeah. I know we were all we were all hopeful to be able to meet this spring, and I know the plans were pretty far along, so I was disappointed that we weren't able to do that. But I do hope to be able to see everybody again in person in the future, not too distant future.
Yes, absolutely. Just so everyone knows, you will get 1 professional development credit for this event. And I believe we will be emailing out the PDH survey and documentation afterwards, maybe in the next few days. That'll be coming from WTS. Any last call for any additional questions? And if not, with that, oh yes, Brennan, thank you. Hopefully everyone can come to Richmond in the spring for the WTS annual conference in May of 2021.
Yeah.
So very much looking forward to that.
Absolutely, sir.
Yes, thanks Brennan for that reminder. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Jennifer, I think that was all the questions. Again, thank you so much. This was very informative. I appreciate your time today and for joining us.
Sure.
With that, I'm going to jump back and wrap this thing up with you guys. So again, I want to thank all of our sponsors. Without them, we couldn't do these events. So VHB, WSP are our gold sponsors. We have Moffitt Nickel as our silver sponsor. And bronze, we have HDR, the National Railroad Safety Services, Mott McDonald, Makana Ports, Simpson Engineers and Associates, Three Oaks Engineering, Dewberry, and AECOM. And another huge thanks to the Rail Forum Steering Committee. I won't read all the names to you. This is an amazing team that I've had the pleasure to work with. Actually, since we started these in 2016, and it's been a great experience. So coming up next, we have a WTS North Carolina Triangle, our luncheon on diversity and inclusion, which is October 7th. The next rail segment will be coming in early November. As I mentioned, we'll talk about the S-Line project and some of the Southeast Corridor Commission and what's going on with them. The date has not been finalized as of yet, so just be on the lookout for an email. And then the Southeast Rail Forum in 2021, we still have sponsorships available, and we'll be issuing a new call for presentations in the next few weeks. So check out the website, southeastrailforum.com, for more information on that. And with that, I want to thank everyone so much for joining us today. This is being recorded and will be available through WTS NC Triangle and the Southeast Rail Forum websites. Thanks everyone, and have a wonderful day.